Hello and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, October 1st, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. Recordings of earlier programs and links to the articles we refer to today can be found on the Facebook page for Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. Comments on this program are welcome. They can be sent to me at cgestabrook@gmail.com. Our program concentrates on the news of U.S. war-making, which is generally not reported, not by accident, in the U.S. media. A fundamental axiom of U.S. foreign policy, going back more than a century to before the open door policy of 1899, is to prevent the economic integration of Eurasia under any political authority, foreign or domestic, for fear that would interfere with the ability of the U.S. 1% to exploit the region. It's surprising to think that the U.S. government and the U.S. economic elite were thinking that way before the end of the 19th century, but they surely were. That principle led to the war in the Pacific that began in the 1940s and underlay American foreign policy throughout the region. The great reversal in the American policy came 70 years ago today with the triumph of the Chinese Revolution. With the end of World War II, the U.S. thought that it had no trouble controlling Eurasia with the defeat of Japan, and they found to their surprise, a few years after the end of the Second World War, that a new power was emerging in China that was not beholden to the United States. The new situation led to the post-World War II wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, in which our government tried to reimpose the position of control that it thought it had, and in the process killed more than 20 million people since World War II. Our present concern with China has a history, a most important history for American war-making. And now modern jihadism enters the picture, Islamic terrorism, beginning with the U.S. attempt to gather up the most fanatic Muslim fighters and send them into Afghanistan to give the Russians a Vietnam of their own, as Jimmy Carter's national security advisor said. At least 20 million dead in American wars, American-caused wars, since World War II. That's a fundamental fact of our policy that we should be more aware of. Our researcher, J.B. Nicholson, sent me a note and said, "Do you dare share Caitlin Johnstone's poetry?" Her recent article, CIA, Climate, and Conspiracy, begins as follows. Take off the revolutionary's mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the terrorist mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the newsman's mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the filmmaker's mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the professor's mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the billionaire's mask, and it's the CIA. Take off the whistleblower's mask, and it's the expletive CIA. These monsters are raping our sense-making faculties. Close quote. That's Caitlin Johnstone on the current situation. Jeff Nicholson says, I think this should be read unexpurgated on Aware on the Air. Relatedly, John Kiriakou, a real CIA whistleblower, not just a spook doing spook things, who blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program, is in an interview with Jimmy Dore. Johnstone is quoted at length in this interview as well, all to Kiriakou's wholehearted agreement for good reason. It's quite interesting to hear his clear explanation of why he couldn't use the alleged whistleblowing avenues available to him at the CIA, and how the Obama administration used espionage charges to essentially bankrupt Kiriakou and coerce him into pleading guilty to a lesser charge. John Kiriakou, who was interesting, was on Tucker Carlson's program last night talking about these and related issues. Kiriakou said, quote, "I couldn't blow the whistle on the CIA's torture program through proper channels because my proper channels created the torture program. And I couldn't even go around my proper channels to the oversight committees because the oversight committees funded the torture program and then covered it up. So I elected to go to the media, which resulted in the entire weight of the U.S. government falling on my head. But that's okay. It was an experience that, in the end, was worth it. I was investigated initially by the G.W. Bush administration because I'd blown the whistle during that administration. And then in December of 2008, the Bush Justice Department decided, whatever you want to say, that I'd not committed a crime, and they sent my lawyers something called a declination letter declining to prosecute me. 4 weeks later, when Barack Obama became president and John Brennan became National Security Counsel, John being an old nemesis of mine from the CIA, John asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. And so for the next 3 years, I had no idea that my phones were tapped, that my emails were being intercepted, and that I had 3 different groups of FBI agents surveying me 24 hours a day. Finally, in January 2012, I was arrested by the FBI and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage coming out of my whistleblowing. In the end, of course, I hadn't committed espionage. That's a tactic that they use to try to coerce you into pleading guilty. And they were successful. Once I went bankrupt, they dropped all the espionage charges, and I took a plea to a lesser charge, but I ended up going to prison for 23 months. Close quote. That's John Kiriakou, who exposed the CIA's torture program as a member of the CIA. He was, as I mentioned, interviewed on Tucker Carlson's program last night. That Carlson program is a very strange thing. It's the one thing in mainstream media that occasionally broaches these subjects. Why that happens is not clear, but and it's a tremendous surprise given the general position of Fox News, but that's indeed what's happening. The word whistleblower has been trending in news headlines lately, but not for the reasons that any sane person could hope for. Quote, "Read the whistleblower complaint regarding President Trump's communications with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky," says the Washington Post. "Trump responds to hearing on whistleblower complaint," says MSNBC. "Trump-Ukraine scandal. What did the whistleblower say and how serious is it?" writes The Guardian. Quote, "Whistleblower complaint says White House tried to lock down Ukraine call records," announces CBS. "Whistleblower's complaint is a devastating report from a savvy official," declares CNN, the Clinton News Network. Who is this savvy official? Who is this courageous whistleblower who boldly shone the light of truth upon the mechanisms of power in the interests of the common man? Who is this brave, selfless individual who set off an impeachment inquiry by taking a stand and revealing the fact that the U.S. President made a phone call in July urging Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to help investigate corruption allegations against Joe Biden and his son? Well, believe it or not, according to the New York Times, this brave, noble whistleblower, who the mainstream media are currently championing, is an officer of the Central Intelligence Agency. The idea that the media needs to protect a high-level CIA officer making explosive claims about the president, which has now been used as a basis for impeachment proceedings, is such an insane perversion of journalistic ethics. Quote, "The whistleblower who revealed that President Trump sought foreign help for his re-election and the White House sought to cover it up is a CIA officer who was detailed to work at the White House at one point, according to 3 people familiar with his identity," the New York Times reports. "The man has since returned to the CIA, the people said. Little else is known about him," close quote. So there you have it. A mysterious stranger from the lying, torturing, propagandizing, drug trafficking, assassinating, coup staging, warmongering, psychopathic CIA was working in the White House, heroically provided the political media class with politically powerful information out of the goodness of his heart, and then vanished off into the Langley sunset. Langley, Virginia is where the CIA offices are. Clearly, there's nothing suspicious about this story at all. In all seriousness, even to call this spook a whistleblower is ridiculous on its face. You don't get to call someone from the U.S. intelligence community a whistleblower unless they're actually whistleblowing on the U.S. intelligence community. That's not a thing. A CIA officer who exposes information about government officials is an operative performing an operation unless proven otherwise, because that's what the CIA does. It liberally leaks information wherever it's convenient for CIA agendas while withholding all other information behind a veil of government secrecy. A CIA officer who exposes information about CIA wrongdoings without the CIA's permission is a whistleblower. A CIA officer who exposes information about someone else is just a spook doing spook things. You can recognize the latter by the way the mass media supports, applauds, and employs them. You can recognize the former by the way they have been persecuted, imprisoned, and or died under mysterious circumstances. But if you listen to the billionaire media, we should be calling this CIA officer a whistleblower. We should be enraged at the New York Times for exposing that CIA officer's identity, and we should be raising a small fortune on GoFundMe for legal aid that the CIA officer will never need. Quote, the idea that the media needs to protect a high-level CIA officer making explosive claims about the president, which has now been used as the basis for impeachment proceedings, is such an insane perversion of journalistic ethics, writes journalist Michael Tracy. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor, privacy for the powerful, surveillance for the powerless. Charity for CIA spooks who will receive full establishment protection, and rugged individualism for everybody else. While all this political media class cheerleading for whistleblower protections is going on, the most prominent whistleblower in America remains imprisoned for taking a principled stand against secret grand juries while being driven into crippling debt. Chelsea Manning is still racking up fines of $1,000 per day while locked in a Virginia federal detention center for refusing to testify against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The mainstream press that is so keen to champion a whistleblower who works for the CIA and provided information which feeds into America's fake partisan pro-wrestling feud has been almost completely silent on the actual whistleblower who exposed actual U.S. war crimes. The courageous whistleblower Chelsea Manning has now been held in a federal detention center in Alexandria, Virginia, for more than 6 months. Manning has not been charged with or committed any crime. She was sent to jail on March 8, 2019, for refusing to testify before a secret grand jury that has indicted persecuted WikiLeaks founder and publisher Julian Assange, who published the information she leaked exposing rampant U.S. imperialist criminality. The vindictive treatment of Chelsea Manning has included administrative segregation, a prison euphemism for solitary confinement, and being fined an unprecedented $1,000 per day for refusing to answer grand jury questions. By the time she might be released in October 2020, she will be left owing the U.S. government as much as $440,000. Convicted anti-war activist Jeremy Hammond, who provided intelligence documents to WikiLeaks, has been also brought to the same jail as Manning in order to coerce him into giving false testimony. On a scale of ha-ha to LOL, how likely would you say it is that politicians' sudden interest in whistleblowing will lead to the reform of the Espionage Act, which the government has routinely used to jail the sources behind some of the most important stories in U.S. history? tweeted NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden in response to an Onion article satirizing the latest hypocrisy. The Onion wrote an article with the headline, "Chelsea Manning, reality winner, excitedly hoping nation's newfound approval of whistleblowers will get them out of jail." Close quote. Fat chance. Pointing out hypocrisy is such a common practice in politics that often wears a bit thin these days, especially since it's frequently done in a disingenuous way. But when implemented with intellectual honesty, it serves a very useful purpose. It shows when people aren't really being truthful about the position they're taking. The political media class of the United States do not care about whistleblowers. They do not care about truth, and they do not care about justice. They do not care about holding power to account because they exist only to serve power. I don't pretend to know what the CIA's game is here. It probably isn't to remove Trump from office, because everyone knows that will not happen, and failed impeachments historically boost a president's popularity. But I do know that everyone cheerleading for this fake whistleblower, while ignoring the real ones, has exposed themselves. My short answer to why the serial impeachment moves versus Trump, this redoing of Russiagate now with relation to Ukraine, the political establishment is afraid that Trump will depart from the neocon and neolib policies of the Obama administration. Those policies are more war provocations and more concentration of wealth in the U.S. Remember, Trump became president by attacking those policies, and the U.S. political establishment is afraid, although he has adopted the policies, that he might actually mean that at some point. You're listening to Aware on the Air, where we're talking about the war making of the United States and what the situation actually is in regard to the supposed whistleblower that the New York Times has discovered this week. It's quite a week. The bitter political conflict in Washington reached a new and explosive stage. The Democrats are moving forward with an impeachment inquiry centered on Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, during which Trump urged an investigation into Hunter Biden, the son of former Vice President Joe Biden, a leading contender for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. More than half of all representatives in the House have signaled their support for the impeachment inquiry announced by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Trump responded by demanding the resignation of the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Democrat Adam Schiff, while threatening physical violence against those responsible for leaking information on the Zelensky phone call. He told a group of career State Department officials in New York, quote, "You know what we used to do in the good old days with spies and treason, right?" Close quote. More Trump bluster. This language, with its allusion to purges and executions, testifies to the degree of political crisis gripping the ruling class and the state, the government. How the conflict plays out in the coming weeks and months remains to be seen. The Democrats have indicated that they want to proceed with the inquiry quickly, with a recommendation delivered as early as November. If Trump is impeached by a majority vote in the Democrat-controlled House, that's the equivalent of an indictment, the case would then be tried by the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. A two-thirds majority is required in the Senate for conviction and removal from office. The critical question is to clearly define the social and class forces involved. This is a conflict between two reactionary factions of the ruling class. On the one side is the Trump administration, a vicious enemy of the working class. In his 3 years of office, Trump has sharply escalated the bipartisan program of social counter-revolution at home and militarism abroad. The Trump administration has constructed concentration camps and detained tens of thousands of immigrants, denied asylum rights to refugees, cultivated far-right and even fascistic forces, elevated the military in domestic affairs, rejected congressional oversight, and attacked socialism as the greatest threat to the future of the country. It's not on the basis of any Democratic issue that the Democrats have opposed Trump. Rather, they speak for powerful sections of the military and intelligence apparatus that have lost confidence in the ability of the Trump administration to carry out the foreign policy agenda of the ruling class as the Bush and Obama administrations did. The scandal over the Ukraine call, Trump's call to the president of Ukraine, has been instigated by the intelligence agencies. It was a CIA agent in the White House who prepared the report that's the basis of the inquiry. It was the decision by a group of Democrats drawn from the military and intelligence agencies that led Pelosi and Schiff, both with long-standing ties to those same agencies, to shift from their previous opposition to impeachment. The Democrats have made clear that they intend the impeachment inquiry to be exclusively focused on Ukraine and Trump's undermining of U.S. national security, as they say. That is, the basic strategic imperatives of American foreign policy. For this reason, the inquiry will be carried out by the House Intelligence Committee and its chairman, Adam Schiff. The Washington Post reported that Democratic leaders are, quote, eyeing a fast-paced investigation. A meeting of the Democratic caucus urged the leadership to keep the messaging around impeachment on national security, and the Ukraine probe, led by Schiff, not on the litany of potential Trump offenses investigated by other panels, including the House Judiciary Committee, which traditionally takes the lead in impeachment proceedings. Some senior Democrats, the Post reported, are even arguing that other committees should forego potentially explosive hearings that could distract from the intelligence panel's work. There will be very few hearings, if any, according to a senior Democratic Party aide, with most of the investigation taking place in closed-door interviews. The Democrats do not want a repeat of the Watergate investigation into Richard Nixon, with its extensive public hearings broadcast live on television. They are even sidestepping a full vote in the House to authorize the initial inquiry, as was done in the impeachment drives against both Nixon and Bill Clinton. The principal fear of the Democrat Party is that the conflict within the ruling elite, circumscribed within a narrow framework, will stir up the already volatile social and political situation in the country. The New York Times spelled out these concerns. The newspaper declared that it has opposed Trump not only because of his personal transgressions, divisiveness, and dishonesty, but also because of the substance of many of his policies on the environment, immigration, taxes, trade, and other matters. But then it insisted that, quote, provided Mr. Trump was acting within the law, he had the absolute right to pursue his chosen course and to be judged upon it by the electorate, one way or another, in 2020. The impeachment inquiry, the Times wrote, should remain confined to the Ukraine phone call and, quote, the integrity of the next election. The latter means connecting Ukraine to the allegations of Russian meddling that had been at the center of the Democrats' opposition to Trump since the beginning of his administration. Beyond Ukraine and Russia, the Times concluded, much of Mr. Trump's behavior should remain outside the scope of the inquiry. The Democrats are seeking to frame the Ukraine issue as an extension of the neo-McCarthyite anti-Russia campaign. Pelosi argued along these lines in an interview with MSNBC, after noting that she, quote, prays for the president all the time. Pelosi declared without evidence that, quote, Russia had a hand in this. The methods of the Democrats are those of a palace coup, involving behind-the-scenes plotting with elements within the military intelligence establishment and the corporate financial elite. This lends the Democrats' operation a particularly shabby character. The Ukraine business hardly casts the Democrats in a positive light. After all, Hunter Biden was indeed involved in underhanded operations in Ukraine, where he used his family connections to secure a highly paid position in a corporation run by a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch. Joe Biden's intervention in Ukrainian politics in 2016 against a prosecutor investigating the company has its own gangster-like character. It's a world of diplomacy and intrigue in which both parties participate. The warring factions in Washington express in different forms the terminal crisis of American democracy, perhaps. The cesspool of reaction is the product of an ending war, the criminalization of foreign policy, and the extreme growth of social inequality. Trump himself is not the cause, but rather a symptom of the disorientation and desperation of the American ruling class in the face of a series of geopolitical, economic, and social crises for which it seems to have no solution. The immediate backdrop for the eruption of the impeachment crisis is a series of geopolitical debacles for U.S. imperialism. The CIA-backed regime change operation in Syria has failed. The Trump administration, facing a disastrous stalemate in Afghanistan, sought and then rejected negotiations with the Taliban. The regime change operation in Venezuela has foundered. On top of this, the economy is heading towards recession, with Trump pursuing trade war measures against China and Europe and launching a war against the Federal Reserve, a principal instrument of the financial elite. Trump is more and more openly adopting the language of fascism as he intensifies his persecution of immigrants. On these questions, however, the Democrats are silent. Any government brought to power through the Democrats' maneuvers would, if anything, be even more directly controlled by the military and intelligence agencies. And it would be a government committed to escalating military operations in the Middle East, as well as the confrontation with Russia. The situation is fraught with danger. However, nothing is more dangerous for the working class than to leave the resolution of the crisis to the rival camps within the ruling elite. The orientation of the working class must be to the growth of the class struggle. The strike by auto workers at General Motors is the latest expression of the upsurge of social resistance in the United States and internationally. The population is moving to the left. With social inequality at the highest level in 50 years, there is growing opposition to capitalism and support for socialism. The critical question is to impart to this movement of the working class a consciousness of its aims. A new political leadership must be built to guide these struggles to the logical and necessary end, the overthrow of the capitalist system and the establishment of socialism. You're listening to Aware on the Air. Our job is to talk about the war politics and of the United States and its involvement in the American class system. And there is, unfortunately, a lot to talk about here that is not talked about in mainstream media. One of the most remarkable examples of this is the real nature of the war in Ukraine, sponsored and promoted by the Obama administration, and now resulting in the deaths of thousands of civilians in the Eastern European country that's hardly recognized or acknowledged by the U.S. media, and even less by the U.S. population. On Saturday, September 7th, almost a month ago, Russia and Ukraine agreed to a prisoner swap, which has brought hope of improved relations between the two countries and an end to the 5-year-long conflict in eastern Ukraine occasioned by the Obama administration. A peace accord was ongoing involving Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany in September. I don't think you heard much about it in the media. Ukraine's newly elected comedian president, that was his former job, Vladimir Zelensky, called the prisoner exchange a first step in ending the war in eastern Ukraine, which has killed an estimated 13,000 civilians. But the Ukraine war remains largely unknown to the American public, even though the United States has a great stake in it. The war started after a coup d'etat in Ukraine in February 2014, which overthrew the democratically elected pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych. In a subsequent referendum, 89% of the people in Donetsk and 96% in Luhansk, the eastern provinces of Ukraine, voted for independence rather than to be run by the new coup-based government, which included explicit Nazis. And the new government in Ukraine did not accept the declaration of independence of Donetsk and Luhansk. The United States was a heavy backer of the coup and the dirty war that unfolded in the east of Ukraine. Victoria Nuland, the head of the State Department's European desk, traveled to Ukraine 3 times during the protests that triggered the coup, handing out cookies to demonstrators, and one thinks doing some other things as well. She told U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt in a telephone conversation that was tapped and later leaked that Arseny Yatsenyuk, neoliberal head of the Fatherland Party, should be prime minister, as he was thought to have the, quote, economic and governing experience. That was the American position. Nuland further revealed that the U.S. invested over $5 billion in democracy promotion in Ukraine since 1991 through the National Endowment for Democracy, which is carrying on the kind of work previously undertaken by the CIA during the Cold War. Ukraine has long been considered an important bridge between Eastern and Western Europe and holds lucrative oil and gas deposits. NED President Karl Gershman called Ukraine the biggest prize, an important interim step towards toppling Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, who may find himself in the losing end, not just in the near abroad, but within Russia itself. The near abroad is the name for the former parts of the Soviet Union that are independent since the fall of the Soviet Union. To help achieve this end, the Obama administration pledged $1 billion in loan guarantees to the post-coup government in Ukraine, which Putin considered as the ideological heirs of Stephen Bandera, Hitler's accomplice in World War II. And the new government in Ukraine that the U.S. was instrumental in putting there was the first government in Europe since 1945 to include explicit Nazis. Swayed by a slick lobbying campaign backed by supporters of the Afghan Mujahideen in the 1980s, looking for a new cause, and by the Senate's Ukrainian caucus, the Obama administration further provided nearly $600 million in security assistance to the Ukrainian military, the post-coup Ukrainian military. It was supplied with counter-artillery radars, anti-tank systems, armored vehicles, and drones in a policy expended on by Trump, and which I say has accounted for, the conservative estimate is 13,000 deaths among civilians in eastern Ukraine. Before and after the Ukrainian military's campaign began, Secretary of State John Kerry, CIA Director John Brennan, and Vice President Joe Biden visited Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, followed by a flow of senior Pentagon officials. A backdoor arms pipeline was set up through the United Arab Emirates, and Blackwater mercenaries were allegedly deployed. American military advisors embedded in the Ukrainian Defense Ministry provided rocket-propelled grenades, carried out training exercises, and planned military operations, including with members of the fascist Azov Battalion, which had Nazi-inspired Volksangel patches emblazoned on their sleeves. You knew the post-coup Ukrainian government made no secret of its Nazi allegiances. Obama's national security advisor, Samantha Power, claimed that the Ukrainian government's response to alleged provocations by Eastern rebels was reasonable, it was proportional, and frankly, it's what any of our countries would have done, close quote. There's a germ of truth somewhere in that. The Ukrainian military and allied warlord and neo-Nazi militias were not acting reasonably or proportionally, however, when they carried out artillery and air attacks on cities and struck residential buildings, shopping malls, parks, schools, hospitals, and orphanages in eastern Ukraine, and tortured and executed POWs in what amounted to clear war crimes. NYU professor Stephen Cohen notes that even the New York Times, which mainly deleted atrocities from its coverage, describes survivors at Slavyansk living as if in the Middle Ages, close quote, as a result of the U.S.-backed attack on eastern Ukraine. Thus, the American public knows nothing of these events. That the American public knows nothing of these events is a sad reflection of the superficiality of our media and decline in the quality of international news coverage. It's also a testament to the failing of the political left, which has embraced the cause of immigrant and Palestinian rights and fighting climate change, legitimately, but neglected the plight of the Eastern Ukrainian people, which are the result of the policies of the U.S. government. You're listening to Aware on the Air. We're talking about the war-making of the United States and the situation that is so badly reported, if at all, in the American media. I have a note here from a friend to this ground and a leading anti-war activist, one of the dozen people perhaps who are keeping God from destroying the universe by doing something serious against the war making of the United States. I refer to Kathy Kelly, head of Voices for Creative Nonviolence in Chicago, who's been our guest here before and is a remarkable and admirable figure in the anti-war movement in the U.S. She's recovering from a broken hip, and she writes from her hospital bed on her experiences with people disabled and traumatized by war, principally now in Afghanistan, the war that the U.S. has been carrying on for 20 years and more, once again, largely unknown to the American public. Its economy gutted by war, Afghanistan's largest cash crop remains opium. Yet farmers there do grow other crops for export. Villagers in the Wazir Tangi area of Nangarhar province, for example, cultivate pine nuts. As a precaution, this year at harvest time, village elders notified the governor of the province that they would be bringing in migrant workers to help them collect the nuts. Hired laborers, including children, would camp out in the pine nut forests, they informed the officials. They hoped their letter would persuade U.S. and ISIS forces, which had been fighting in or near their villages, not to attack. It's the situation in Afghanistan right now. Afghanistan, remember, that the U.S. invaded in 2001. On September 17, 2019, exhausted from a long day of work, the migrant workers reached their rest spot for the night and began building fires and making camp. In the early hours of the following morning, a U.S. drone attacked, killing at least 32 people. More than 40 others were wounded. The U.S. military claims that ISIS fighters were hiding among the farmers who were killed. Kathy Kelly writes, I followed this story while recuperating from surgery after breaking my hip on a train from Chicago to Washington, D.C. Before the train even reached the first stop out of Chicago, kindly emergency services workers had bundled me off to the Memorial South Bend Hospital. I was well cared for, and now a physical therapist is already helping me with movement and exercise. I read about the laborers who survived the attack on the pine nut forest. According to Haider Khan, the owner of the pine nut trees, about 150 workers were there for harvesting, and some are still missing. One survivor described people asleep in tents pitched near the farm when the attack happened. Quote, some of us managed to escape, some were injured, but many were killed, said Juma Gul, a resident of the northeastern Kunar province and one of the migrant workers who'd traveled to harvest and shell the pine nuts. I can't help but wonder, where are the missing? What care was available for wounded survivors? How many were children? Did a nearby facility offer x-rays, surgery, medications, clean bandages, prostheses of one or other sort, walkers, crutches, nourishing food, and physical therapy? I remember on visits to Afghanistan watching disabled victims of war in the capital city of Kabul as they struggled along unpaved roads using battered crutches or primitive prostheses. Closer. They were coming to collect free duvets being distributed to people who otherwise might not survive the harsh winter weather. Their bodies so clearly bore the brunt of war. In Kabul earlier this month, my 21-year-old friend Muhammad Ali reminded me of the importance of asking questions. Wanting me and others to understand more about the impact of war on his generation, he prodded, "Kathy, do you know about Jahanzib, Sabur, Qadir, and Abdul, these brothers who were killed in Jalalabad?" The brothers, ranging from 24 to 30 years of age, were killed by an Afghan strike force trained by the CIA, according to the news. In Jalalabad, 2 of them worked for the government and 2 ran their own businesses. The squad that entered their homes beat them severely and then killed them. Family and friends felt sure the brothers had no links to militias. They, quote, "They were kind and humble people. Anyone who knew them loved the boys." Naqib Sahizda, who owns a shop in the area and knew the brothers for more than 10 years, told Al Jazeera. They cared for people and also had a good sense of humor, close quote. In her World War I memoir, Testament of Youth, Vera Brittain wrote about volunteering as a nurse towards the end of World War I. Her clinic in France received European soldiers from the Western Front who arrived mutilated, maimed, exhausted, and traumatized. Her fiancé, her brother, and 2 close friends were killed in the war. One day she thought she must be imagining the line of soldiers who marched past the clinic tents, looking robust, upright, and well-fed. Then she realized they were from the United States. New recruits come, and the war machine grinds on. Looking forward, perhaps we won't see so many lines of U.S. soldiers marching through villages and cities in Afghanistan. A soldier operating a drone can continue the United States mission from afar. We must still bear in mind Vera Brittain's pertinent comments about the realities of war. Quote, "I have only one wish in life now, and that is for the ending of the war. I wonder how much really all you have seen and done has changed you. Personally, after seeing some of the dreadful things I have to see here, I feel I shall never be the same person again, and wonder if, when the war does end, I shall have forgotten how to laugh. The other day I didn't voluntarily laugh at something, and it felt quite strange. Some of the things in our world are so horrible. One day last week I came away from a really terrible amputation dressing I had been assisting at. It was the first after the operation, with my hands covered with blood and my mind full of a passionate fury at the wickedness of war, and I wished I had never been born." Close quote. From Vera Brittain, Testament of Youth, about her work in the First World War. Kathy Kelly writes, "I look forward to going on with my life once I recover from this broken hip. I can only imagine Vera Brittain's overwhelming ordeal, and I can only imagine the trauma of a child laborer awakened by an aerial attack in a pine nut forest, racing through the trees in hopes of escape, and perhaps surviving in great pain without a limb or missing a brother or wishing he had never been born." Kathy Kelly about what our government is doing in Afghanistan and continues to do after almost 20 years. You're listening to Aware on the Air, where we try to talk about the wars the United States are conducting, which are not reported in appropriate detail in mainstream media. Back to the politics. The recent impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump is the second attempt by the CIA and the Democratic establishment to sabotage Trump's presidency. The first attempt was the Russiagate conspiracy theory, which falsely claimed that Trump colluded with the Russian government to win the election. It took more than 2 years to defeat it. It had the intended side effect that it disabled Trump from making peace with Russia. The second is likewise run by the CIA and the Democratic establishment. The CIA created an artificial issue that the Democrats used to justify the launch of an impeachment process against Trump. The impeachment attempt has little chance to dethrone Trump, but the affair will again hamstring any attempts for better relations with Russia, which is the real point of the political establishment's move against Trump. The operation is also designed to further prevent Trump digging into the background of Russiagate and the people behind it. The second attempt is a simpler construct than Russiagate, that is, Ukrainegate, the current one. A CIA operative who was temporarily delegated to the White House constructed a whistleblower complaint that is completely based on hearsay and public sources. It is also about issues that are outside of the CIA's immediate business. Until very recently, the intelligence community complaint form required that any claimant had first-hand knowledge of the complaint issue. The form was changed in August, but uploaded only on September 24th to also allow for hearsay to be the basis of the complaint. This reinforces the impression that the complaint is part of a larger intelligence operation by the CIA against the Trump presidency. Who initiated the change? The whistleblower statute says that the matter in question must be an urgent concern that is defined as, quote, a serious or flagrant problem, abuse, violation of law or executive order, or deficiency relating to the funding, administration, or operations of intelligence activity involving classified information, but does not include differences of opinions concerning public policy matters, close quote. At the core of the complaint in question is a claim that Trump used a phone call with President Volodymyr Zelensky of the Ukraine to press Zelensky to investigate two issues. The call memorandum was declassified and published. During the phone call, Zelensky had two requests. He wanted U.S. anti-tank weapons, and he wanted an invitation to the White House. He got both. Trump also had a request. He asked the Ukrainian authorities investigate two issues of U.S. public interest. The first is the reported interferences by Ukrainian government officials in favor of Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election campaign. This also involved the notorious security company CrowdStrike, which made some false claims about Russian hacking in the Ukraine. The second one is the also well-known intervention by then Vice President Joe Biden against a Ukrainian attorney general who had an open investigation against a company that was sponsoring his son, Hunter Biden. The U.S. and Ukraine have a treaty that requires them to cooperate on law enforcement matters. That Trump wanted the Ukrainian authorities to investigate these issues was well known. His personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, had said for several months that he was looking into these questions. The issues pointed out in the complaint are clearly beyond the scope of the whistleblower statute. Trump's actions with regard to the Ukraine, especially the phone call, were neither outside of any law, nor do they involve any intelligence activity. What Trump did during the call was not nefarious. The issue is clearly a question of, quote, differences in opinion concerning public policy matters, close quote, as the statute says. A whistleblower complaint must be sent to the relevant agency's inspector general. If he finds it credible, it goes to the head of the agency, who decides if it's within the statute, and if it is, sends the complaint to Congress. The agency's inspector general, Michael Atkinson, found the complaint credible, but after seeking legal advice, the acting director of National Intelligence, Joseph Maguire, did not forward it to Congress. It was the right thing to do, as the content of the complaint is neither whistleblowing nor within the relevant statute. But what happened next is curious. The agency's Inspector General, Michael Atkinson, notified Congress that the complaint existed, but says he and McGuire have reached an impasse over whether to turn it over. I found no legal analysis if this was a required move or outside of the usual process. After that step was taken, details of the complaint leaked to the press, as they were supposed to do. The Democrats immediately raised a public ruckus and demanded to see the complaint and call transcript, the complaint and the call transcript, and to have them declassified. They likely hoped that Trump would fight them over this, but Trump immediately obliged. He had nothing to fear. A diligent reading of the phone call memo and the complaint shows there's nothing illegal or otherwise condemnable in his behavior towards the Ukraine. One may not like what he does as president, but that does not make it illegal. Despite the lack of any, I don't like the fact that he's aiding the Nazi-infested government in Ukraine either. Despite the lack of any sound basis, the Democrats announced an impeachment inquiry, even as it has little public support and will drown out any positive momentum for policy issues the Democratic primary candidates want to promote. The impeachment inquiry will run right along the lines laid out in the complaint. The complaint and the Democrats claim that Trump held back loans from the Ukraine to press Zelensky on the issue. Zelensky denies he even knew that the loans were withheld and said that it was a non-issue. Senator Chris Murphy wrote, "In my meeting, Zelensky did not make any connection between the aid that had been cut off," remember that aid was to kill people in eastern Ukraine, "and the request that he was getting from Giuliani, but the Ukrainian government certainly, through multiple channels, was expressing their confusion about whom they should listen to." Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, has himself intervened with Zelensky. While, quote, "While choosing his words carefully, Murphy made clear by his own account that Ukraine currently enjoyed bipartisan support for its U.S. aid, but that could be jeopardized if the new president acquiesced to requests by President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to investigate past corruption allegations involving Americans, including former Vice President Joe Biden's family. The Democrats say that it's unfair that Trump is asking the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, who currently leads the Democrats' primary. They claim he wants the material only to smear Biden. But there's no need to smear Biden. He himself proudly told the story, Joe Biden did, of how he blackmailed the Ukrainian government. It's also widely known that his son Hunter had an affair with his sister-in-law while his brother was fighting cancer, spent extravagantly on drugs and prostitutes, according to his former wife, and was dishonorably discharged from the Navy for cocaine use. 3 weeks after Joe Biden had helped to overthrow the Ukrainian government, his not-so-honorable son, Hunter Biden, was invited to take a $50,000 per month board seat of Burisma, a Ukrainian gas producer whose owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, was under investigation for corruption and tax evasion. Hunter Biden did not know anything about Ukraine or natural gas. The company had only one reason to hire him, and that was his father. A few months later, Joe Biden withheld a $1 billion loan guarantee to get the Ukrainian prosecutor general, who was running the corruption investigation against Burisma, fired. Biden claimed that he wanted the prosecutor general to go because he was corrupt and the case against Burisma was already closed. But several recently revealed papers shows that those claims are false. More dirt about Biden's action in Ukraine is just coming out. By opening the impeachment inquiry, the Democrats, not Trump, highlight Biden's corruption and throw him under the bus. That may be a welcome side effect for the Democratic establishment, which prefers the second incarnation of Hillary Clinton, Senator Elizabeth Warren, wins the primaries. There's other dirt that the Democrats might fear. During the 2016 election campaign, Alexandra Chalupa, a Ukrainian-American who worked for the Democratic National Committee, had contacts with the Ukrainian embassy. She asked for digging up dirt on Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had worked in the Ukraine. Soon a mysterious ledger was found by an anonymous person in the burned-out headquarters of a Ukrainian party, which allegedly showed that Manafort had received large amount of black money. The ledger was an obvious favor by the Ukrainians for the Clinton campaign. Trump had to fire Manafort, who was later sentenced for tax evasion and other unrelated crimes. Trump wants to pardon Manafort and needs some public reason to do so. If the Ukrainians find that the ledger was faked at the request of the DNC, the issue might well fall back on the Democrats. But what's the intent of the CIA in organizing this clearly abnormal whistleblower complaint? Here we have to look at the second request Trump made to Zelensky. He wants to know more about Russiagate. During that operation, which was directed by Obama's spy chief John Brennan, the former MI6 agent Christopher Steele created a fake dossier of alleged collusion between Trump and the Kremlin. The dossier was used to justify FBI spying on the Trump campaign. It's quite possible that some of Steele's Russian sources were actually from the Ukraine. There are also a number of loose ends from the 2014 coup in Ukraine, which the CIA will not like to have disclosed. Zelensky had promised to restart the investigation into the Maidan massacre. The CIA would surely like to prevent any disclosure of its heavy involvement in that affair. Good relations with Trump would have helped Zelensky to achieve his aims. It would have hindered better CIA control over Zelensky. The disclosure and ruckus about the phone call will make it more difficult for Trump and Zelensky to cooperate. That part of the plan worked. But there is already a casualty on the side of the plotters against Trump. The new Ukrainian president was looking for ways to make peace with Russia and had hoped that Trump would help him. The Hawks had installed Kurt Volker, a U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, to prevent any such moves. Volker, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, had been hired by then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, but had demanded no pay. Volker is the hawkish head of the McCain Institute, which received donations from George Soros' Open Society. He's also a partner in a public relation company that was hired by then-President of Ukraine, Poroshenko. The whistleblower complaint says that Volker visited Zelensky on July 26, one day after his call with Trump, to provide advice to the Ukrainian leadership about how to navigate the demands that the president had made of Mr. Zelensky. Volker was a Borg member sent to Ukraine to exercise control over the Ukrainian government. He clearly tried to sabotage Trump's efforts to push Zelensky to investigate the Ukrainian side of the Russiagate and Biden affairs. Volker also wanted to prevent better relations with Russia. You have been watching Aware on the Air, produced and directed by Jason Liggett. Thanks to him also, this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. Comments on this program are welcome. Email me at cgestabrook@gmail.com. We rely on our researcher, Jeff Nicholson, whose blog, Digital Citizen, we recommend highly. We steal from it regularly. There's a link to it on our Facebook page, along with his detailed notes on this program. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others who are truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government, and particularly our liberal Democratic Senator Durbin, a shill for the Russiagate propaganda and unconstitutional attacks on the free press, notably in the case of WikiLeaks. Aware's monthly anti-war demonstration will be held this Saturday, October 5th, 2 to 4 p.m. at the Susan B. Anthony Memorial Fountain in downtown Champaign at the intersection of Main and Neal Streets. Come anytime between 2 and 4 p.m. on Saturday and join others protesting against U.S. war-making. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.